Season 1 ended with so much expectation of the fallout. That's all in the Audi world. Classic Severance technique to withhold information in a way that keeps the audience on their toes but doesn't necessarily frustrate them.
Where the season would end, that was already figured out by the writers by the time we began. A lot of the arcs within the season, we didn't necessarily know where they would fall in the later episodes, but we knew what their stories would be.
It was a bit of a learning curve when you're joining a project that's already ongoing and a tone has kind of already been set. I had certain expectations about what things were going to be based on what I'd seen from the first season. Very early on, it was focused on the characters, focused on the relationships. That's what's going to be the driving dynamic for the whole story.
Hey everybody, this is Josh from Manhattan Edit Workshop. I want to welcome you to another episode of Sight, Sound, and Story. This is episode 45. I've been doing this a long time. So please, first, like, subscribe, do all the things. Let us know how you feel about these videos in the comments and what you'd like to see. Tonight's episode is very special because it's about the Apple TV series Severance. We're going to specifically look at season 2, which is kind of an amazing thing that it really not only lived up to season 1, but carried it into a really incredible new place. It had a lot of incredibly exciting editing, really fast-paced and frenetic stuff, intensity, and then it had these quiet moments where you really could just sit with the characters. And then, of course, the finale ending, all that wanted and made me want to do was not have to wait another 3 years to see what happens to these characters next. It was really, it was an amazing show. Everybody loved it. And I think you're going to love this event where we really dig deep into the technology of it, the art of it, what it's like to have 3 different editors cutting different, episodes at different times. So really happy to have editors Geoffrey Richman, ACE, Keith Fraase, ACE, and Joe Landauer to take you through this process. We have our good friend Chad Anderson. He's a MU instructor and all around great guy. So you're in good hands with this group. I can't wait for you to check this out and talk about the editing of Severance. Curious about creating high-quality YouTube videos? Enroll in video editing and production classes at Manhattan Edit Workshop to sharpen your skills and turn a hobby into a career. Start your journey to becoming a pro today.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sight, Sound, and Story, where we have the unique pleasure of talking to the artists and creators behind film editing, sound, and cinematography. My name is Chad Anderson, and today I am delighted to be joined by the editors behind the hit Apple TV series Severance. I'd like to introduce first Geoffrey Richman, who's worked on documentaries such as Murderball and Sicko, as well as Tiger King and Till Kingdom Come. Also joining us is Joe Landauer, who is known for the films Signs and Time Cut, as well as Hello, Goodbye, and Everything in Between. I'm also excited to welcome Keith Fraase, who's worked on Elvis and Annabelle, as well as Past Lives. They're all here today, though, to talk about Season 2 of Severance. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It is really one of my favorite shows. I have been introducing it to all of my friends. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for having us.
I don't want to rush too much. But I do want to, there's so many questions I want to ask, and we'll get into some technical questions, but I want to ask about story. I know it starts with a script, but going into season 2 from season 1, when season 1 was over, my first thought was, how are they going to do a season 2? Everything's ruined in that, so many things have come out that all these people must be fired immediately, and there's no redemption from season 1. How do they go into a season 2? And yet you did it extremely well. Were there issues that you knew that you needed to solve going into season 2 immediately? Like, were there things that were happening in season 2 that were like, oh, we need to explain how this went from here to there and what the aftermath is of the finale of season 1. So how did that start out?
I mean, I think a lot of that was actually the work was done for us in the writing, especially episodes 1 and 2, because those really were crafted to bring us up to the moments after the end of season 1's finale. And I think it was just kind of a brilliant choice on the writing, where it's we can spend all this time with Amy Mark in episode 1 and then kind of tell the same story from a different perspective in episode 2, which gave time to sort of like understand how we arrived at where we are in time, and how Lumen dealt with the aftermath of everything that happened in season one. And it just kind of gave time to sort of like explore all that and reconnect with all the characters and understand where where we are and where we're going with the story. So a lot of that work was actually done really for us in the writing.
Brilliant choice, I must say, to start the season with any Mark, because season one ended with so much expectation of the fallout, but that's all in the outie world. So classic Severance technique to withhold information in a way that keeps the audience on their toes but doesn't necessarily frustrate them. And it was when I remember reading that, I thought, oh, what a fantastic way to kind of take the edge off all the question marks, because we're in a place where Mark's just as confused as we are in the any side of things in season or in episode one, and it really worked brilliantly. You know, it kind of smoothed out all those expectations, and so by the time we got to episode two and really did explore the outie world, we had kind of settled into the season already. So
was there a tone that going into season two? I like the ideas of tone or direction that you're going in season two. I think season one was a lot about just kind of understanding the world of Lumen and understanding, you know, what some of the basic predicaments were. Season two kind of went into a more personal direction. Was there a sense that you were given from the showrunners in terms of tonality, where you said, hey, these are the points that we're trying to hit in season two, make everything feel this way?
I wouldn't say outright, no, but a lot of stuff was sort of like those personal storylines that we're going to be following were kind of clear from the beginning, just because there's just inherent conflict in Mark, Helly, Gemma. And so just kicking off the season with these very clear like exchanges of dialogue with Mark and Helly, where he's saying, well, I got to find Gemma, and she, you know, it was pretty clear like what journey we're entering. And so that was the sort of like initial conflict. And then obviously, like as the season grows, more emerges with other characters. But there was definitely like a really strong kickoff for us about kind of honing in on like the characters, and that this was going to be the major thrust for the season.
Coming in, you know, being new to the season, not being part of the first season, that like trying to, you know, it was a bit of a learning curve when you first you're joining a a project that's already ongoing, and it's already like a tone has kind of already been set. And you know, I had certain expectations about what things were going to be based on what I'd seen from the first season, or you know, thinking I had a kind of handle on something. And I know, you know, some of my early edits, it was like trying to push up some of the absurdity too much, or a little bit some of the comedy too much. And you know, very early on, it was like, oh no, we are like just focus on the characters, focus on the relationships. That's what's going to be the driving, you know, the driving dynamic for the whole story. So everything else is kind of, you know, it really is a very character-driven piece, even though there's lots of crazy things that are happening around it, and all the absurdity adds to some of the, you know, intrigue and interest. But the heart of it is, you know, the relationships between everybody. So
there's a natural, you know, going into the second season, there's just a lot more storytelling happening, in a sense, because season one is introducing the world to this very unique and incredible idea. It has the ability to really withhold and to mystify the audience, draw them in part by their disorientation or their, you know, engagement with Mark without fully understanding the scope of his story. And by the time you get to season two, the world has been established, the characters are established, and there's a great need to then engage those characters on a deeper level, and to really kind of get into the storytelling more quickly. And then, of course, there's just that many more characters now that we're exploring the Audi world, not just through Mark's eyes. And so, I'm like, my sense of it quite early on was like, oh, these feel very different to season one in terms of how the story unfolds, and it was really refreshing to feel in the writing so much emphasis on character and on these small arcs that are monumental because we're so invested in the journey, and so we're not kind of allowing this world that's a fantasy ultimately that has no rules. We get to make up the rules because we're not in the real world, at least not as we all know it. And it really could be anything. And you've seen it time and again where shows spin out or just lose the thread because they kind of work the ideas or the possibilities too hard to keep the audience engaged. And in the writing here, we're all engaged because we want to know what the hell is going to happen to Mark, and it can be pretty small, and we're still drawn in and excited, and the tensions feel palpable, and I love that while we're exploring a much bigger world in season 2, we're really kind of keeping the focus at all times on character and on, in particular, of course, Mark's journey.
I think it's interesting because you have, in season 1 there was a bunch of, what I would consider secrets. There was these things that were in there that were secrets, and I was concerned that season 2 was going to answer all the secrets. I kind of liked the secrets, and I liked the idea that there were those secrets in there. And then I was afraid, season 2 is just going to be a answer all those questions and solve all those secrets. But you introduced a whole new set of secrets in there that now I'm like, oh, now I need to wonder what the heck's going on with there. So you create this community of viewers who are all trying to figure out what's this about, and what are these rooms about, and what's with the goats, and what's going, and then, I imagine season 3 will have a whole new set of secrets in there. In terms of that, in terms of your work, is it important that what's happening in future episodes, and do you have the whole season written out by the time you get into the editing room? In terms of that, so for some shows, they don't even know where they're going by the end of the season, necessarily by the end of the episode, but by the end of the season, some shows will have it all kind of pinpointed out and the entire architecture written out. And is that important to you?
I mean, for us, the macro arcs of the season, we knew going in. Like we knew, well, exactly, the macro data arcs we knew going in. Like where the season would end was already like figured out by the writers, like by the time we began. A lot of the like arcs within the season, we didn't necessarily know where they would fall like in the later episodes, but we knew what their stories would be. So like for instance, like the Miss Wong storyline or the Dylan storyline, we didn't see the scripts for the later episodes of that, like episode 9, until later in the process. But we knew what each of those storylines were once we began. So we knew kind of like where it was going to go and what the conflict would be, and how that could play out. And so that was kind of like enough to sort of begin the process of editing. And as more things were written later on, then I still don't think we have to really reshape anything based on things that came up in later episodes, with maybe a couple exceptions. But we definitely had a sense of like what the storylines were.
Yeah, the end target was always, from a very early date, clear. And there were lots of changes happening along the way in the scripts before shooting, and Um, uh, and so the journey would change, but the end point for each of these storylines was pretty clear and rock solid. And I can't point to any major changes in how a character's line resolved. How we got there, it was fun because we were watching that evolve over the course of the writing of the season, and that did change a lot. And but I suppose you can make those kinds of changes as long as you have your end point in mind. It allows a kind of freedom.
We knew early on about the heli reveal in episode 4 and how like important that was, especially for like when Joe and Jeff were working on the early episodes, like how to you know, that's a very carefully calculated massaging of a performance to make sure like there is enough that when you go back and you rewatch, you're like, oh, this is obvious, but you know, you don't want to make it too obvious because you don't want to give away the reveal. So these are all like, you know, you have to be aware of those kind of bullet points and those kind of twists and turns. Otherwise, all the work that you're doing is going to have to be completely redone. So, and I think we even knew earlier on like what. Like I remember when I came on the project, we knew that like episode 7 was going to be like the Gemma episode. Like some of these things were even like marked out, like earmarking what episode was going to be, you know, what was going to hit what beats, even if the whole thing wasn't like completely written like at the time.
I mean, that's like the Gemma thing is a great example because like in episode 7, it would have really hurt us if we didn't know where we were going in episode 10.
Sure.
So like obviously like knowing what Cold Harbor is was kind of crucial when episode 7 was being edited. And so like I remember Keith like even like did multiple passes on the scene where Mark tears apart the crib to really make that a strong standout moment in the episode so that it resonates 3 episodes later when we get to Cold Harbor. And like, so that's like, it is important to know where you're going.
Sure.
For those reasons. And same with like with Dylan and Irving, like scenes with them, like in episode 3 have to resonate so that when episode 4 happens, Dylan's emotions in episode 5 have something that they are resonating from, you know, like his rejection of working with Irving in episode 3 and what happens in 4, and then 5 were connected to him in a way because a trail has been set to that point.
And turning to Helena's deception reveal in episode 4, that you don't want that to feel like the rug is being pulled out from under the audience's feet. You want to give the sensation of, oh, of course this is what's happening, you know, as opposed to like, wait, what the hell just okay, you know. So it was fun to calibrate and to kind of intentionally give the nudges in that direction to start a conversation, to pique people's interest, and then of course give that a fantastic reveal in the episode.
I was going to say because there's a scene in, and I don't remember early, where Audi Helena is reviewing video footage of Illy Heli kissing Mark with this kind of like intrigue. And I was like, what's that about? You know, and then the reveal, obviously, you're like, oh, that pinpoints to there and that makes that connection. And I see that, like, oh, that's why they put that little nugget in there, as you said. I can't imagine, it must be the challenge of, because I feel like season 1, when the show first came out, for viewers, it came kind of out of nowhere. You're like, oh, there's this new show, blah, blah. But now you have this viewership who wants to know what's going to happen and wants and has all their conspiracy theories about everything else. For the 3 of you to keep those secrets, to not tell anybody while you kind of sort of know where the show is going, I couldn't do it. Couldn't. I'd start little whispers and try to answer questions.
I don't. I didn't find it. It's not hard not to tell secrets. That's kind of a fun thing. But I found it the most difficult thing is keeping myself from going on like Reddit and checking theories like when the episodes were coming out. So like, and I'm like so happy I didn't like engage too deeply in that while we were working on it, because it probably would have tripped me out to be like,
Oh
oh my
God,
God, I
yeah.
cannot believe how attentive the viewers are and how they're picking up on every little thing. It's
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing to be a part of, and like, just to be in that orbit.
You're so deeply engaged in the episode you're cutting, the journey that the characters are on. You're like, I rarely thought about uh, the exposure, and I certainly
Yeah.
never considered it in how I approached my work. Um, but so this is just icing on the cake to have all the scrutiny.
I want to take a look at this first clip that you shared. This is the first inclination of any Helly lying, which I totally, you tricked me, and it was a good trick because of, I thought the lie was just saving face. But can we take a look at that clip?
Saw the inside of a really boring apartment.
So you live by yourself?
Yeah? I was watching some nature show on TV, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt.
What kind of t-shirt? Did it feature like a band or pocket?
It was like a Save the Gorillas shirt,
Cool.
I guess.
And then what?
Then I went outside and found a guy. He looked like a gardener. Told him everything. I think he kind of thought it was bullshit, but he said that his brother was a cop and that he would tell him everything. I don't know. Sorry, guys. I really tried.
A gardener?
Yeah,
A night gardener?
I think so. Maybe he has a different job during the day.
So yeah, this is and again, you talk about the performances, the subtlety with which Irving begins to, a little tiny little light bulb goes off that has
Mhm.
Irving questioning some of what Helly is saying, and I never considered Irving to be as kind of insightful or there, but he really proved himself in this season. What were your thoughts about this scene?
It's kind of the stuff we were starting to talk about already, about like planting these seeds so that when we arrive at episode 4, it isn't just a like gotcha, like surprise moment. It was kind of rooted in a lot that when you look back makes perfect sense. And so, it's like, it's kind of just like, okay, if it's just like a sudden surprise. But if you have enough of these moments where you feel like you should have picked up on these things, then it's a much more satisfying reveal when we get to episode 4. And this, on the flip side, when people are watching episode 1 or 2 at whatever point, even if they pick up on the fact that Helly might be Helena, that even that is still satisfying because there's enough laid out in the edit to latch on to that could be like, oh yeah, look at that, look at that, look at that. That
Sure.
like, even if you kind of predict it, it's still, I find, satisfying because the crumbs are there for you to find. And so episode 1, well, and 2 and 3, and 4, but like though that early run was like, like he said, is a lot of like paying very close attention to exactly what's the looks from Helly, what she says, how she says it, and making sure that it's that balance of like not giving it away in an overt way, because that would be unsatisfying, but not making it so like not there that it would be unsatisfying when you got to episode 4. And so like this episode, I mean, this scene in particular, like this scene, there's like already been a few clues like before this happens, like when she points out that there's no security cameras at MDR. She also, like right at the beginning of this scene that we're looking at, she reminds them that there's no microphones to tell them to talk about what they saw. And there's also like reactions to Mark saying what he saw and her reactions to the Lumen video, like all of which you could see either way. You could see it as Helly reacting to these things for her own reasons, or Helena because she already knows everything that's happening and she's looking for information. But this scene in particular, this scene was actually shot both ways. This was shot as this wraparound, which is a very like shift in rhythm and shooting style that sort of signifies we're entering this new space, this new idea. Like she is lying, and the music kicks in. We did have this covered in the traditional way, which is the rest of the scene. And that was sort of like a safety of like, if it felt too overt to go into this like creeping around with musical tone, then we could fall back on the like just standard over the shoulder coverage. But we never really went with that because like it just felt like you needed first of all, it's a beautiful shot, like wrapping around.
Yeah.
But it also just has this like lean in quality of like, oh, she's lying. Why is she lying? And the shooting in this style kind of like allows you to sort of see that this is a moment that you should be thinking about. The line that I find it's a little bit later in the scene that I find brilliant in the writing is when Irving is reluctant to say what he saw, and Helly says, "It's okay. You can tell us even if it's bad." And that line, I think, is what really like the people who see this and think like, oh, she just doesn't want to share that she's the head of this awful company. When she says that to Irving, it's like, yeah, that's what I thought. She just doesn't want to share that she's the head of this company. And it kind of like solidifies your suspicion of why she's lying as Helly.
Yeah.
But obviously, like looking back from after episode 4, it's like a completely different interpretation.
It's good for a rewatch. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was one of those people who just like, oh, she just, I lie to my coworkers all the time. I'm good with that. But, I don't want to tell them about my personal life, so that's a whole different argument. It's a weird question. There is, I think that years from now, research institutions will be writing philosophy textbooks based on the nature of self inside of Severance. And I struggle with that, wondering who I would be as an innie versus who I would be as an outie, and who I am. Is there a thought in your heads as you're editing of keeping track of the innie version of people versus the outie version of people, and what they have and what they know, and how they act, and what we include in terms of their personality? Is there points you catch yourself being like, oh, this is an outie scene, or that they wouldn't know that? I wrestle with it all the time, being like, well, no, wait, Mark didn't know this because he was innie Mark at the time, and how does he, and I don't even know if they, there's a scene in there where he says, do they know what time of year it is, or what the date is, or what, who's, what holiday it is, or whatever it may be.
Or how do they know what an ocean is? It's like, but those kinds of things can come up, and so, but it just piques your curiosity.
I mean, the thing is that the actors are they're so good at giving enough, like especially Adam Scott, like giving such like, I mean, he plays these both characters, the innie and the outie versions, in different ways, and like, and it's up to us as the editors, obviously, to keep track of like, and to respect the performance and make sure that we're portraying the performance honestly, and keeping making having the performance be consistent throughout the different takes and stuff that they're as they're capturing the performance. But I'm just always amazed by, like, especially again, I just to call it Adam, like the subtle shifts that you see when he transitions from outie to innie, and how he has such a firm grasp of those two different characters, and also and it's not just like the difference of the character, because the characters are different, but both characters evolve and change. over the course of season 1 to season 2, and he's keeping track of those changes and how, especially any Mark evolves and changes and becomes more independent and becomes more, and is willing by the time we get to episode 10 to kind of, to fight back a bit and, to choose something for himself. And those are things, I mean, that's part of all of our discussions of like, where are we in their journeys and keeping track of each individual person, but the different parts of themselves and where they're at in their individual journeys and where the evolution is. It can get a bit mind trippy, trying to separate it all out and think of it. But that's also part of the fun of editing it. And I mean, the funnest part of editing anything is crafting performance, right? And I think that's what's so special about this show is getting to be able to do that, and think about the multiple ways each of these actors play their different characters.
I want to take a look at this next clip. This is it's, and again, we talked about this today, the philosophical arguments of self. I think any Helly is becoming attracted or romantically linked to Mark. Meanwhile, Audi Helly is becoming romantically linked to any Mark and still wants to flirt with Audi Mark, sort of in a way. And there's this, awkward flirtation that's happening here, that happens, I think, sort of in this clip. Mark ends up being a charming guy, which is surprising. So let's take a look at this clip, and I want to talk about it.
I'm like the head of the company, Mark.
Right. Dumb, sorry.
Yeah, you should be sorry.
Really?
I'm kidding.
Okay.
You're clearly not dumb.
No, you're the one who invented a revolutionary medical procedure.
Hey, now, that was not me. That was my father.
Uh-huh.
You should meet him sometime.
Your father?
Sure, why not?
You want to take me home to Dad already?
Yeah, I think it's finally time.
Okay. Sure, let's do it.
You'd be the first.
So, no pressure.
Yeah, none whatsoever. But seriously, I'd love to hear about your experiences sometime.
Okay, yeah. About Severance?
I meant the overtime. I meant the other night. I mean, I can't imagine how confusing that must have been. Traumatic, even. And I know you've already been through so much with losing your wife and all. Hannah.
Gemma.
I have so many questions about this scene, just in general, about what Mark is thinking. It seems flirtatious but annoyed, and he does it really well of kind of balancing both being resentful and, judgmental, but also being charming.
Well, this to me, this scene is a quintessential season 2 scene, because it's a scene where, I mean, in season 1 there might be scenes where somebody knows something more, say Petey and Mark meeting at Pip's, but the key is you have the disorientation that Mark brings to the scene, because it's all new and being introduced to him. In this season, we have characters who are learning more and are understanding the world, or at least having their suspicions. And then in that scenario, it becomes more of a dance where two characters are matched, and in a sense it heightens the flirtation, because that's kind of how a lot of romantic scenes are written. It's this conversation outside of what is being said, through the characters' attraction to each other. This is wholly different and really screwed up, but that element is in there, and it's very purposeful in the writing, obviously, but that incredible look down that Mark does at the end of their kind of flirtatious dance cues you to just the horror and the danger of it, because he can't wrap his head around what is going on, and he and we are trying to sort through what's motivating this, why is this conversation even happening. But there's so many elements unspoken in the scene that are that just make it such a rich scene. I mean, it's just it's the writing and the acting really just kind of it made it such a pleasurable scene to cut. It was
and it's really held well in the performance and in the writing. But the idea that he's kind of getting, with the taking me back to meet your parents, blah blah. It's very playful. It's very playful, and then she uses the wrong name. She used the wrong name for his dead wife, and that immediately takes him out of that moment. It immediately kind of pulls him back, and it's like, oh, that's right. You're still the head of you're the enemy. You're still the head of the company, and in some regards, I don't know you, but you're still an enemy in that capacity. And I still wonder, and I will wonder for the rest of my life, whether the misuse of the name was intentional or accidental. Was it motivated to get a reaction out of him? And
it's an assertion of control on her part. Yes, it is intentional. But it's also a tactic to elicit a response, because she doesn't know what he knows. She suspects he's up to something, and it speaks to this kind of dual. It's funny because Helena, in my mind, is a dual character even outside of Helen, because she has these tensions within Lumen in her relationship to her father, the kind of the real human part of her character, that is a daughter coping with her father and trying to find connection and getting nothing in return, and the kind of the wounded psyche that comes with that. And so she is both Helenas are in the room in this scene. She is genuinely interested in Mark, but she's also there as I guess as an enemy, as you would say. But she is the one in charge, and she's not gonna she's gonna do her duty for the company.
I was going to ask, because they are complicated characters. You do a nice job with playing with the idea of, dimensional villains. Milchek is a villain, but later on you kind of see where he's coming from. And Helena, like you said, she has this complicated relationship with her father, and it's this, the being in charge, super boss kind of, calling the shots is also mitigated by her relationships of, she feels like she's putting on a performance to live up to the Egan name, whatever that may be. In terms of the characters overall, though, you do play with a lot more in season 2 about adding depth to these characters. I feel like each character had their own mini storyline of backstory of like, okay, this is where you're coming from. The first season was Irving's a pain in the butt, and nitpicky. Dylan is argumentative and sometimes trivial, and Mrs. Cobell, Mrs. Selvig, is just always angry and there. But they all come in with their own crafted, what's kind of going on in the back of their minds of what led them to this place. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Because it is so character driven in expanding the world, not just like the plot of like what Lumen's up to, or it's really about expanding the world of the characters and their relationships to each other. and sort of understanding them more. And I think like having 10 episodes to kind of really explore like the other side of, like you said, like Dylan and Irving and Cobell, even like that's, it's like things that you don't expect to see, and having it play out in this very personal and understandable and engaging way. And I think like, that was to me like the strongest sort of like macro element to this season, is that the character storylines expanded as much as the world. Like we go out to like Salt's Neck, we go out to, the retreat, and we in episode 4, and like we go to the testing floor in 7. It's like the physical world expands so much more than in season 1. But what I think is really strong about this season is that the characters and their relationships and your understanding of them expands with it. And I think that that's something that we certainly had an eye on in the edit, but was obviously very much in the writing, and just a really fun thing to be, to kind of help craft.
I'll say that my favorite thing, just this season, the fact that now both innies and outies of each of the characters are being more fleshed out, and it's becoming so important, because the inherent conflict of Severance is obviously the innie and outie conflict, right? It's like in that you're arriving at a place where the desires of each of the innie and the outie are in conflict with one another. So you can be rooting for both. You can be rooting for both innie and outie Mark, even though their desires are like they're inherently opposed to one another, and neither one is necessarily wrong. It's just the existence of one, of the existence of both of them, puts them in conflict with one another. So it's so important that we flesh out each of these characters, so that the audience is being pulled back and forth, like, well, where do our allegiances lie? Who do we care about? We care about all these people. We don't want nothing to happen. And so it raises the tension for everything. And so I love that Dylan's life is more, we get to see a lot more of his home life. We get to see, obviously, a bit more of Irving, Audi Irving and stuff. And I think that I think is really where the magic of season 2 is. Because season 1 relied so much on the mystery, like who are these people outside, and and that can carry you along and make it really interesting. Season 2, I think, deepens just these characters so much that I think, or hopefully we're going into season 3 now, not showing who we want to win out, or we want them all to win out. At least I do. So yeah.
I think like the most satisfying response to the end of the season was people arguing about who they were connecting, like who the villain was, like Innie Mark or Outie Mark. Like people really connected with him turning back and going to Helly, but people also hated him for it. And I thought that was such a satisfying, rewarding response to the whole season, because it's like, yes, exactly. You should be connecting and rooting for both Innie and Outie Mark, and you should have a conflict about which one is right, because you understand and you're connecting to both of them. And that's, I mean, from season 1 all the way up to the end of season 2. And I think that was just very rewarding to see people like arguing over that.
It kind of reminds me of that the famous Jean Renoir quote in Rules of the Game, where Octave says, the problem in this world is that everyone has their reason. And it speaks to not just the kind of these polar needs in Innie and Outie Mark, but it also speaks to, as storytellers, the need to love and understand all of your characters. And so understanding that the quote unquote villains in this show are complicated, deeply screwed up people with major faults, and so are the good guys. Everybody is motivated by their own personal needs, and you're never going to respect or really understand a character if you don't honor that and understand that everybody is working to their own purpose. And it is a testament to the show that I think Ben has said this many times, that he's wanted it to defy genre, and I think that's almost like a protective shield, this kind of commitment to these real complex rounded characters who all have different motivations that are not necessarily moving in the same direction, even when it's the same person, so yeah, it's yeah, and it speaks to like the focus of the show on the characters as opposed to bigger plot concerns. We end with this character choice. We don't end with the big lumen reveal or something like that.
I'm thankful that you didn't provide me any kind of backstory of Drummond and didn't make him a lovable, father of three. He was just a brutish bad guy. Like, just give me somebody.
Yeah, we cut out all those scenes, right? Just kidding.
Even I was wrestling with the Audi Dylan and his relationship with his wife versus any Dylan with his relationship with his wife. I'm like, I don't, and it made me feel dumb because I'm like, you're the same person, but you're having a rivalry over the affection of your wife with yourself. It'll spin your brain a little bit. I do think it's interesting because I think this next clip that I want to show is the eulogy clip, which is Dylan talking about Irving, who always seemed like they couldn't stand each other, but they were kind of, had this weird brotherly love. So if we can take a look at this.
It's hard to pinpoint a favorite Irving story. For the least fun guy in the world, he was really fun. He put the dick in contradiction. One time, he was pissed at me for watering down the toner, so he put toner in my water cup. He stopped me before I drank it, though. He just wanted to make a point, not harm me physically. But I did accidentally take a sip of it later because I forgot he said that. He asked me for help with something near the end, and I didn't listen. And in his final moments, he would have been totally justified in telling me to suck my own fuck. But he didn't. He was awesome and I miss him.
It's interesting because there's such a bizarre comedic, circumstance of Dylan. I feel like I'm this eulogy is under any other circumstances would be hysterical, but at the same time I'm sad and I'm touched and I'm overwhelmed with grief. So you're playing both sides of that. Can you talk about this clip?
The funeral scene was one that for a while it was there were more beats to it that we kind of ended up taking out. It had been played a bit more. The absurdity was raised up a little bit higher. There was a lot more that was kind of happening, and kind of like the oddity of Lumen was sort of like the focus of it, and how the different ways that they were trying to allow the refiners to grieve Irving in their own way, but not let them grieve too much. So yeah, it was kind of it was an interesting and kind of funny scene, but we realized early on, I just think Zach Cherry's performance in this is so amazing and so touching that it kind of became the cornerstone for the scene, and everything else sort of we were like, we need to rework the scene because that's going to be the heart of it. Episode 5 was a challenging episode because you just had this huge climactic reveal, and there's kind of a reshuffling of things in episode 5. Everyone's trying to figure out where do we stand with one another? How, what's real, what's not? Everything we thought was real, is nothing real anymore? Mark is so frustrated. He's actually, Mark is Mark is a bit of a different character than we've ever seen before because he's just so upset about, feeling betrayed. Helly is confused. She hasn't been around for the last 4 episodes. She's trying to figure out, where, what's been going on and what's been happening. She feels so violated, having her body being taken over in her space. Everyone's there's just a whole readjusting of where everyone is in relation to one another. And I think that what I love about this moment is because everything's been stripped away, and even though Dylan is, he's still got funny lines in his eulogy, the performance is he's missing his friend, and he's saddened, and you realize that these relationships are real, and what the feelings, it just lets Mark know that like these feelings, like even though you're concerned that you can't tell what's real anymore, and is it really Helly? Is she really back? There's this feeling of like, no, these are real relationships, and they mean something, and they're important. And when you lose somebody, the coworker is not just gone; they've essentially died, and and these are real feelings. Anyway, I just think that to me is just what elevates Severance as a show, beyond all these interesting and heady ideas that are happening. Um, that the relationships that are being forged are real and they're very meaningful. Anyway, I just love Zach's performance there, and it was not something that I was expecting when I read the script. So when we got the footage in, and this was like a really emotional and moving kind of moment, and he was really letting himself feel those words and feel the loss. It really just it caused us to kind of just adjust and rethink everything that else was around it. And I think it really becomes kind of a turning point in that episode.
Yeah, it works. It works really well. And like I said, there's points where he's drinking the toner, and then I'm laughing because it's surreal. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, there's the line that he says where he says, I forget how he phrases it. You're my favorite, worst person to work with. That there was this kind of like, arguing, kid brothers that were fighting against each other, but deep down were best friends, and I felt like at some degree that scene, that eulogy scene, kind of spells out that this is what they do. They throw things at each other and they play practical jokes with each other, and they're mean to each other, but deep down they can't live without each other, and now they have to.
It's funny that you said that about the brothers thing, because like I think about that a lot with my I have two kids, and a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old brother and sister, and they're each other. Everyone always asks like, do they get along? I'm like, well, they're each other's best friends, but they torment each other. Like, and whenever they're together, they're just pure chaos with one another. And they're kind of each other's like whole world, right? And if ever, like whenever they are driving each other nuts, we separate them, and then they freak out, like, "Oh no, where are you going? I know we were just screaming each other's our heads off, but we need to be together." Anyway, and that is very much the dynamic, I think, with like the Irving. I mean, that's the dynamic with all the innies, right? Like this is their whole world, and there's a lot of conflict there. But but when something is disrupting that world, like this is their family, and when something disrupts that, like it's devastating to them. And I just think that's so fascinating to experience that in what we're all looking at as like just an office culture, like, oh, a coworker has gone away, but it's not that. It's a family member has died or has been, essentially murdered in this sense. Like, anyway, that's why I think this all the levels are very interesting. But
well, the innies they are like nascent people. They're like children in a sense, and inevitably children grow up, and what makes them grow up is life experience, love, tragedy, jealousy, and all of those emotions exist even in a nascent person or someone who's developing. And so the inevitable line is going to move towards this autonomy, or towards a more kind of purposeful, thoughtful life that you begin to advocate for yourself in. So it's this the fault of the Lumen theory that these are not real people. These are they're like treating them as though they're a half a person and never going to kind of fully realize themselves, but they're just like us, and they in fact are us, and they will, given the right time, the right set of circumstances, come out. And so in season 2, a scene like this is essential for showing and displaying that growth and seeing and feeling with them as they their lives get more complicated.
I think what's interesting that you did in this season, and it happened season 4, it happened in episode 4, and it happened in episode 7, is that you do step out of, you know, regularly scheduled programming. It's not just, hey, this is what happens in macro data refinement. This is just what happens, and we go through these series of, you know, innie and outie, you know, at Mark's place, you know, with Mrs. Selvig back in the things. But you go, you know, and the writing goes into left field. It goes into this other scene, or in this other world there. In episode 7, I think it's important because you have to establish, if we're going to this end, we have to establish that, you know, we've seen kind of out of context, he misses his dead wife. We need to give context to that. And I think that, you know, I want to show this scene of this, where he first meets her, getting blood drawn, of this moment that, you know, where they first kind of fell in love. And this episode 7, kind of reflects a lot of that. Oh, this is their relationship. It wasn't perfect, but they were in love. And this, because you have to establish that there's more than just, oh, there's some anonymous woman that he misses. So if I want to take a look at this episode, or this clip here from episode 7, the meet cute scene.
What do you got there? Sorry, what do you got there?
Themes of religious conversion in Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich.
Oh my God! Spoiler alert, please.
What about you? Are you reading?
Me? Well, oh yeah, this is a real treat. All Quiet on the Western Blunt. Drug use by enlisted soldiers during World War I.
No, stop.
No, that's what it is.
Kid's a genius. You should flunk every other child.
I couldn't agree more. I'm sorry, who are you?
Gemma.
Oh.
All
right. Mark.
Yeah, so we just start to establish kind of, you know, and it almost is reflective of that Heli scene, or that Helena scene, in the restaurant where Helena comes meet him. He is a charming guy. He is, you know, he does come up with charming, and you build that sort of, you know, sense of relationship as well. Can you talk about the scene a little bit?
I mean, this was the thing about episode 7 is you have to kind of immediately, you know, we've talked a little bit about how we're, you know, where this whole season goes is sort of the conflict between, you know, Annie Mark and Addie Mark and what they're desiring, right? And we've had, you know, almost 2 whole seasons now to build up the relationship between Annie Mark and Heli. And then we have 1 episode to really build up the relationship between Addie Mark and Gemma. And this is the first time we're seeing them together, you know, seeing how they interact with one another. And again, this is another one of those scenes where originally it was a bit longer. There was a lot more back and forth, a little bit more stuff that kind of happened and more dialogue. But you know, as we were working through it, their chemistry was just so apparent, and we were getting so much from their looks to one another that we realized you just didn't need, you know, it's almost like it's there from the first moment they see each other, right? And so we started to just kind of strip away certain lines and other interactions and different things that happen in the scene to where it was just about like this instant connection that they have with one another, almost like it's kismet. Like they just sit down next to each other, and this is like there's a spark. And I think they both do an incredible performance. And yeah, anyway, it was something that, you know, as we were waiting for this episode to get shot and come in, I was very nervous about it. Like, how are you going to convey, we've built this relationship so much up in our minds ever since the reveal happened in season 1. How are you going to convey everything about the relationship in this 1 episode? And yeah, it was amazing. I think that, you know, they immediately have this sort of connection. They have this sort of they feel at ease with one another. They feel like a married couple to me. And and I think it really I mean, all the credit to the actors and to Jess, the director of the episode, of like being able to pull that out of them. But I think, episode 7 really lived or died on how much we believed that relationship and how much we cared for them. And for people who felt it was successful, I feel like it's because, it was so like there was a whole life lived in that one episode, right? A whole relationship lived, I should say.
Yeah,
That by the time you end it, that by the time we arrive at the, the ending of the season, you are feeling that pull, like, oh my God, I now see why Mark was so devastated at the loss of his wife. Not just that you understand it intellectually, but you feel it as well. Anyway, that was the heavy lift that was on 7, and I just what I love about this one scene is just that I feel like you see it from the very first moment, like, oh, there is something that these two people share with one another, that doesn't need to be spoken. It's just there in their looks.
Well, because you have to separate her from Miss Casey, like, because Miss Casey, if it's a debate between his love interest with Helly, Innie's Mark love interest with Helly, and this other woman who comes to give therapy, this kind of very shut down therapy of making you feel better. That's all we knew about. We didn't know Gemma. We knew Miss Casey. We knew this character who is this kind of blank face therapist. And you're like, well, how could you be in a relationship with her? You need something more of a personality to really get to her, to say, okay, now we have a rivalry here, and now we have some sense of conflict of, at least for a viewer, we can be like, oh, I don't know who he should be with, and I think we get to that point.
We only know Gemma through Mark's grief and through his eyes, his great sense of loss. And so we're never going to connect with Gemma separate from Mark. We need him to give us access to her character so that we feel for her through him before we really can allow ourselves to get invested in her story, which is the ultimate story of the episode. So it was the structure shifted a lot in that episode, kind of finding that balance. How much Casey before we meet Mark do we,
Yeah, but then you lay on top of that all the by the way, there's also all the reveal of what Lumen's doing, and trying to keep that mystery going and not leaning too far to that without to overshadow the important thing with all the stuff that you're talking about with Mark and Gemma. And I mean, it's like you were saying, Keith, it's so much was relying on episode 7 succeeding. And the rest of the season, this is not hyperbole, the rest of the season would fail if not for 7 succeeding. And because you cannot, 10 cannot work, and 9 as a conduit to 10 cannot work if all of the parts of 7 are not working. Connecting to Mark, connecting to Gemma as her own person, understanding what Lumen's doing, all of those things had to work for 10 to work.
And that's the story right there.
Yeah, I remember, you hear people talk about it, and friends of mine are like, what is Cold Harbor? What is Cold Harbor? And I was like, oh my God, I really hope that the disassembling of the crib really lands, because that's what you want. You want, when she opens the door and she sees that crib, you want that kind of, knife in the heart, gut punch to land, because people have been waiting the whole season to know what is Cold Harbor, and that's the reveal, and so it really has to land in you have to feel the pain of the miscarriage and the pain of the loss of starting this family in 7 for all that buildup for Cold Harbor to really pay off. So anyway, that was a moment where I was like, okay, I gotta stop seeing what people are talking about, because it's gonna give me an anxiety attack.
I was wondering, with a show like this, watching a show like this, there are things that I would watch, as an editor, and think, oh, I would love to edit that. And for me, there's a bunch of scenes that are inherent to Lumen as a company that are these randomly chaotic scenes of the dance parties and the big events that happen inside the room that are just kind of these made up, ridiculous, fictitious, melon parties, and they have all these rituals. Even in season one, my daughter, who's 13, she's been watching. She was curious about Severance, and I was like, well, there's not really any nudity, and there's not, there's some language, but yeah, you can watch Severance. So she's been watching the first season of Severance with me, and she said, I never want to work at a job ever, because she just assumes this is how office life is like. Is it for you guys in terms of shooting those chaotic scenes? Is it challenging? Is it enjoyable? Is it because there's some crazy, the marching band scene was absurd and hectic. Are those scenes enjoyable for you, or are they mountains to climb?
Yes, they're very enjoyable because they're like so different and fresh and a departure from everything around it. The challenge with those is not surprising in any way, making sure that they don't derail us from the story. And so like you can have a music dance experience, you can have a marching band, you can have all these things, you can have the like the waffle party, but it's like it's got to keep the train moving on its tracks. And so the marching band in particular, like that was a challenge, and that was also something like I was nervous about working on, not just the initial songs of the marching band, but the whole structure of the marching band in the second half of the episode is like, how do you keep coming back to this marching band in a way that doesn't feel like a distraction from this deeply emotional climax of Mark arriving to the testing floor and reuniting with his dead wife, and like you still got to come back to the marching band, but it's like, how do you do that in a way that doesn't interrupt the emotion? And so like that's the big challenge with those hectic, chaotic Lumen scenes.
I find in the writing that those chaotic scenes are very purposefully in dialogue with the emotions of the episode, the inner state of the characters. Obviously in season one, when Dylan explodes at Milchek during the dance, I mean that dance is in perfect synchronicity with his emotional state, and so they become supportive of each other, and the band works that way too, in a very different way, because it's about energy and movement as well. But that is often the case in Severance when you have those breakaway moments. They're not just kind of randomly happening. They're kind of coming at key moments for characters and actions that are happening within the episodes.
Yeah, I found that, you mentioned, because I'm thinking about season one and that Dylan scene in particular, where Dylan is about to lose, go into a rage. It's interesting because it's so careful. I think you're so careful in the marching band scene and all these scenes not to make it goofy. If you cross a line into silly, and the moments are absurd. They are surreal. And so we do have a sense of that, but it's this really fine line of being surreal enough that you're still in the mood without being like, this is a cartoon, like this is sort of surreal, but the surreal is more frightening than just, nonsense. Because if you cross the line into nonsense, you lose the whole mood, and you kind of come right up to that line and then not go over that line and keep, this sense of, this is surreal, but it's surreal in a way that's terrifying sometimes, more so than just, absurdity, which is really kind of beautiful. Which, in talking about the marching band, I do want to take a minute to talk about Milchek. I think I went back and forth with about 17 characters. Milchick may be my favorite character, because of his ability to play with expression, and play with both hostility and pleasantness. He does it better than anybody else whatsoever. Was it rewarding getting to get those facial shots? Even in the eulogy scene before, when we saw like Milchick's judgmental, you cut away to Milchick's judgmental look for a second there, and then he's, you know, bright smile, very there. He's a complicated character. He's difficult.
You know, it's amazing. I think that he's I mean, he's one of my favorite characters too. I think because he's you know, it is easy, and I think I mentioned early on in our conversation about how, you know, when I first came onto the project, you know, trying to play up some of the comedy a little much, and then you realize you don't have to do that because that's exactly the problem you're talking about. You tip over into ridiculousness, and then you lose all sort of, and it just doesn't need it. You know, it's all there, and if you, and I think the reason why, like, where it works is because. Like all of Milchick's, like he's a very funny character and he says absurd things. I mean, episode 5, he has that whole spiel about the Gracopan. I can't remember the way he says it, but it's all believable because like he has somehow found a like that character is he's living in this sort of heightened reality, but the emotions are all true, right? And his desires to have a certain control over this space and to do well in his job are very real and very true. He just goes about it in kind of a, you know, a heightened sort of way. It's a very, very fine line, and I think that you know, the actor, oh my God,
Mel.
huh?
Tremel Tillman.
Tremel. I remember Tremell's name. I think, you know, Tremel. He, I was amazed by his dailies. He has that character so well in hand. You know, sometimes actors will give you lots of different ranges of performance, and they're trying out different things, and he does that. He'll give you lots of, but it always feels like Milchick. It's really amazing. I think that he is somehow, he just toes that line so perfectly, and it's always charismatic and interesting and funny and sinister at the same time. I don't know how he does it all, but those are in the dailies. He's phenomenal.
There's some actors just have you feel the internal conversation. You know, you feel the thinking behind the face, and Tramel's just always active. You feel it, like even just in a he can do so much with so little because you fill him with complexities just off the slightest look, or you know, like just seeing Tremel sitting in his office thinking is a terribly exciting shot. You know?
Yeah.
Because you can just feel the depth of emotion, conflict, complexity, you know, and you know, it's exactly probably the kind of person Lumen doesn't want to hire. Because he is a guy who is you know, you can just feel that he's deeply profound. You know,
I mean, like
Tremel takes it very, like he thinks very deeply about this character and his performance, you know, and you feel that certainly.
There was an interview with him on one of the late night shows about his pronunciation of the Swedish word "kakapen," or however he pronounced it.
Gotcha.
How it was pronounced wrong, but it was pronounced in a way that he thought that he would pronounce it based on being like, it was very much, it was very meta of like, no,
That's amazing.
I understand that it's wrong pronunciation, but I thought it would be better to pronounce it like he thought he would pronounce it because he's thinking about the character and how the character would pronounce it, like. And I was
That's
like,
amazing.
that's real deep in terms of, you know, not only the right way to do it, but the right way for the character to do it. It's fascinating. I want to take a look because I want to get to another scene here. You have another great scenes that you've shared. There's a scene of which Petey kind of went through in season 1, but I think it's more honed in this in terms of Mark going through the reintegration process and becoming aware that he's two people, and you kind of build that, as he, I guess, transitions into an integrated person. So let's take a look at that clip, because I do want to talk about it.
Mark. You okay?
For an editing perspective, I can see how challenging that is. For a shooting perspective, to make sure that lines up perfectly.
This whole concept is a real credit to the director Uta Breitswitz, who I think she's a director who's incredibly visual and nimble in terms of coming up with great visual ideas in the spur of the moment. It's like second nature to her, but she is deeply committed to the character's point of view and how they are feeling in a particular scene or episode. And this is a great example of where her intuition as a director, she shot a lot of basically mirrored setups, mini setups in both locations, lining them up as best as possible, but really had no understanding of how it might all come together, but that this was covered in a way that was inherently subjective and put you in Mark's shoes, because the key difference from the fritzing, which is what we called it in post, that happens in season 1 to PD, is that where PD's losing touch with reality, he's slipping in and out of a kind of consciousness or between consciousness, and this is something that's kind of bombarding him and that he's been experiencing. We needed to have it feel very different and unique because this was just beginning to happen to Mark, and we needed to see him experience it and feel it very much in his shoes, as though it was happening for the first time. And so it was it's a real credit to Uta for coming up with this concept. I mean, Uta and the team, of course, but when she shot it, it was terribly exciting because it was a wealth of choices, as you can imagine, and this was a fritzing scene that happens in episode 6. It happened to be the first that was shot. So even though we have similar scenes earlier in the season, this was the first time it was shot. And so there was a real kind of inventive feeling behind the editing of this sequence, and a freedom to come up with a visual style and feeling with all of this footage, but it felt like new frontiers, which was really exciting editorially. And then, of course, once we had this in the bag, then that informed the shooting of other fritzing scenes, which added more complexities and kind of built on the ideas behind it, But like having that moment where Mark finds himself in Mark finds himself in Audi Mark's apartment and just stepping back for a beat to let the moment land in the wide shot and just feel his presence in that space before shifting back into the fritzing really gave it a shape that wasn't just this kind of wall of noise and activity. It was this experience that this guy was having that then we fell back into kind of the fun of the fast cutting and the moving between scenes. It was amazing. And there was some small shifting in post and whatnot, but most of the feeling of what's happening in that sequence is in camera and straight editing. There's a surprisingly small amount of digital work.
That was going to be my question: was how much of the show is taking place doing visual effects, and is there a lot of kind of invisible effects that are done for that? I have a friend of mine, a former student of mine, who was a PA on set for this show, and they had shared a photo on Facebook of Mark's the front door of Mark's apartment. And it's in a studio. I mean, the front door there was nothing else. It was just empty space. It was studio lights and just the door frame, and the rest of it was just, I guess, added in through some kind of set extension. How much of do you interact with visual effects in terms of your day-to-day work in that?
Oh, hardly at all.
Really?
No, it was intensive. There was it's a show that's designed around essentially a few weeks period in the dead of a snowy winter, and a lot of winterization has to happen in post. There's a lot of snow being added now, this speaks to the invisible nature of a lot of the effects. It can be as mundane as just kind of creating the believability that this is all happening within a single week or two span, both seasons, but all those kind of mundane effects that are invisible and that you don't think about add up to a singular tonal vision that really gives the show its unique feeling, frame to frame. And it's incredibly important, because if you kind of suspend that feeling, well, then you're just not immersed in it in the same way. So it's actually quite effects intensive, and it's often mundane in a sense, but it's deeply serious in terms of getting the tone right. Sometimes it's like even changing cars in the parking lot so that they fit the feeling of the show, or what you see in the reflection of glass. I mean, it's like it gets down to very minute details. So there's a lot of work being done that you don't realize as a viewer.
So in regards to that, about the snow, I have a complaint. I work in Monmouth County, New Jersey. I work about a mile away from Bell Works, which is where all the exteriors for Lumen is shot. We have not had snow like that in 2 or 3 years. I've taken my kids there. It's the same place. It's all the exteriors and some of the interiors are in that same. I'm like, there's no snow like that. That's got to be like, and my daughter thought, she's like, where was this shot? I'm like, no, this was shot right here. Like, no, that has to be in Alaska or someplace where the amount of snow is there, Aspen, Colorado or something. I'm like, no, it's all the magic of visual effects.
Occasionally you would get snowfall and there'd be a big scrambling, to go out and shoot the real thing, off in second unit and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was amazing when the season fit the actual tone of the show.
Yeah. So. I looked and I was like, yeah, they couldn't have had that much snow. Like, I remember, I'm trying to think back to like winter, and I'm like, no, there was never that much snow. Not at this, not this year, or in the past year and a half. So speaking of which, should we go to Woe's Hollow and talk about this climactic Irving heli scene, which I'm sure was shot in a desert somewhere, and you added all the snow in later.
Right.
You know, the waterfall, the whole thing, all artificially created.
It's all inside, yeah.
But yeah, this scene, this changed my attitude and opinion about so many people, and it's such a heavy scene. Let's take a look at it and let's talk about it.
What you said to me last night, it was cruel. Heli was never cruel.
I'm right here.
So if you're not her, then who are you? Who would have the power to send their Audi to the severed floor? Hmm?
I'm sorry.
Ah!
No, Irving!
Mr. Milchick!
No. No.
Come on.
No! Irving! Stop! Irving,
Mr.
no!
Milchick!
Stop!
Ah!
Ah!
Mr. Milchick! Irving! Mr. Milchick! Irving! Mr. Milchick! Come!
Mark!
Mr. Milchick! Mr. Milchick!
Mark!
Hey! Turn her back, Mr. Milchick! What are you doing, man? Turn her back! What the f? She's an Audi! Hey! Irving, cut it out! Stop! She's been an Audi the whole time! Ever since she came back! Irving! You stop! No! Stop it! Irving, stop this! She's a mole! What are you doing? I'm gonna kill her, Mr. Milchick! She's not Heli! She's an Egan! Turn her back, Mr. Milchick! Turn her back!
God damn it, stop doing!
Yes! Do it, Seth!
It's Milchick. Remove the Glasgow block now. No!
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love the doorbell sound, the doorbells or the elevator ding sound. It's so much of it is so well done. Can you talk about this for a second?
This is obviously the end of all the things we were talking about from 1 through 4 of planting the seeds to get to this reveal. That scene with Irving and Helena at the tree is like, it's like kind of like a dream set of dailies to get. It's like the kind of scene where it's like every single line and every single movement and action and performance is like perfect and charged with so much emotion and intensity, and it's just like putting it together is almost like kind of easy because it's like it's all in every take of every shot of every angle, and it's like those kind of scenes where they're just like a joy to cut, where it's just like I get kind of like giddy even just like watching it now, just like how amazing they are in that moment. And also the writing too, because like that's another case where it's like a single line is doing so much, where he's like how, you know, who would have the power to send their Audi down to the severed floor, because like you can track like he suspects that she's not Heli, you can track that he suspects she's an Audi, but there's a leap to get to she's an Egan. And like that line is doing so much to just fill in a bunch of holes to like get us to him yelling, she's an Egan in the next scene. But yeah, I mean, like there's just like so much about the scene that was just like fun to edit. Like the fact that they're literally standing on the top of a waterfall. There's no like blue screen tricks or anything like this. And so it's like those big wide shots where it's like the camera is like zooming in and out from up above down to Irving, and then from Irving up down up to them and back. They shot like in the dailies, they shot like just kind of a series of like going in and out at different points in the scene. It was sort of like we can pick where it would land to sort of be the most strategic use of them. But like they were really important because it would be such a waste to think that they're in separate places and that anything about this is cheated. And so it's like to be able to see that we're down there with Irving and we're looking up at the top of a waterfall and they're literally standing up there, no tricks involved, was a very important strategic shot to have. Interesting thing about this whole sequence is also that there's a few times in the course of editing where of the show where Teddy, what he does is he creates Teddy Shapiro, the composer. He creates this like library of cues for us to edit with. So we're never using temp music. We're always working with score. And there's certain times where it's like we don't have what we need, where it's like we have so many pieces of music, so many like different tones and styles and like that have been applied to all these different scenes in season 1. And then in episode 4, there was certainly like this new theme that he wrote for episode 4, sort of like this Keir like theme of them, which is a whole different melody. But then this scene, like before we even got to it, I remember like having a conversation with him where it's like, I don't think we have like music that I can even cut to with this. It's like I could pull from like the action stuff from like the finale of season 1, but it's not quite right because it's like something completely new and different. And so he had to like write what typically like what he does is like normally he waits for like the scene to be cut and then he will like he'll refine our use of his music to the scene. But in this case, he actually wrote like 2 brand new suites just to serve the purpose of the climax of episode 4. And he writes these like 3-minute, whatever, like long pieces of music, not to picture. And this scene, because it was so different than anything that we had done before, it kind of called for like a brand new sweep of music from him that we're able to use while we were cutting. But like, as far as like the beats in the scene, there's like so much to track as far as the characters. It's like obviously like the stuff that's going on with Irving and Helena, but also like because we have to understand where each person is, like you were saying before, like understanding what each character knows at every given moment.
Yeah.
So like it was definitely like like kind of like diving into the dailies to find the perfect reactions from Dylan and Mark and also Milchick. But like Dylan's reaction, Mark's reaction has to indicate like certainly that like Mark's surprise, which will then resonate in episode 5 when he feels tricked and betrayed and sort of lost and like distrusting of everything. And like that reaction is kind of the thing that kicks that off. So you have to really feel it in that like 1 second moment of like, Irving is right, she's not Helly. And all of that is folded into this very quick reaction. And then same thing with Dylan. It's like Dylan's reaction in that moment, but then also the exchange that he and Irving have right after this scene are what sort of kick off Dylan's story that happens after this with the funeral and then all the beats that come later and then how he returns in, episode 10, like full circle. But like, I think it's, I just remember like really look like Ben and I both were like really like looking for those specific moments that kind of like serve all those purposes to help later.
If this scene has a spine, it's Irving. Like this, he is the he's holding the scene together. He's the connective tissue. He's the one who's feeding us information. We're learning through him. And my God, John Turturro just delivers in this scene
Oh my God, yeah.
in such an incredible way that it just firms everything up and holds it all together, you know, and the way he performed it, the way you cut it, Jeff, I mean, it's just, it really elevates a thrilling scene and an exciting scene and makes it personal and real and consequential. And that was my just kind of stunned reaction when I first saw this scene. Once
Do it, Seth is maybe one of my favorite lines in the season.
Yeah.
Do it, it's
right,
such
and
a
the
good
delivery of it is just
oh my
fantastic.
God,
it's
yeah.
such a challenge, you know.
Do it, Seth.
Oh God, it just tickles you every time you watch it. It tickles you. It's just great.
Oh, fun trivia fact. Like I was just thinking, because right after that he dunks her. The shot of her underwater was done later because it was done in like a water tank. Later than this shoot on location, and but in order to keep to build a first cut, like an assembly of the scene without losing a sense of the rhythm, there's a shot in the Lumen video in episode 1 where Helly is dunked into water, the pineapple bobbing, so we use that as like the temp shot to her getting dunked into the water. Which flowed, it actually like really helped like give a sense of the rhythm of that, of when we want to go to her underwater. And
well, I think it says something about the music and about the reaction shots. It says something about the exceptional editing, and a credit to all three of you is that, you know, there is, you know, this refusal to settle, that like, no, we could use temp music, but this music, there's music in my head that's ideal for this moment, or there's a shot in this moment that's ideal for what it is, and I'm going to go through all of the footage to get the right shot, because I don't want to compromise. You know, I don't want to we'll just grab this and this will be fine. It does say something, that there's as much, you know, like, to be cliche, as much heart put into this, that it doesn't you know, just cut corners to get the result. It's like, no, I know what I'm hearing, and this needs to be right, and that is exemplified in the quality of your work. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here and taking the time out of your day. Geoff Richman, Joseph Landauer, and Keith Fraase. I do appreciate the show, and I am anxious and also a little bit terrified for season 3. I'll be honest, I don't know where it's going to go, and I'm frightened and concerned. But I really do appreciate you being here for this. This was Sight, Sound, and Story. The beauty of music, beauty of television editing in this case. And we'll see you in a future show. I am Chad Anderson, and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching tonight's episode inside the editing of the show Severance on Apple TV. I'm Josh from Manhattan Edit Workshop. Please like, subscribe, tell us how you feel. I want to thank editors Geoffrey Richman, ACE, Keith Fraase, ACE, and Joe Landauer. Of course, our friend and moderator, Chad Anderson. I'd also like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, AJA, ACE, American Cinema Editors, and Filmmaker U for helping make all of this possible. And of course, if you watch all of these shows, you'll know I would never end without thanking Janet Dalton and Jason Banky, both from U-Shop, who make all these wheels turn and make my job really, really easy. So stay tuned for more episodes coming up soon. We got lots of great stuff coming down the road, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.